So, Chris, let's talk about Brian and these particular pieces that Dan and I have recorded, his Elegy to Edgar Varese and the 4 piano pieces. They were all written in 1967, which was the year that both he and I graduated from high school. And then he went to Lehman College and came to Cornell the year before I did. But what attracted Brian to Edgar Varese in particular? Do you know?
I think, although I don't know, and maybe about the only person who can know that might be Peter Schickele.
Oh,
one of the few people from Brian's Juilliard prep days and art and music that Brian continuously kept in touch with. I mean, he kept in touch for a long time with Ron Deutsch, who played, I think, a bass in a quartet that used to hit the Catskill circuit occasionally during their Lehman years. But I don't think Brian ever spoke to Ron or Julio about the other stuff he was doing, because they were music ed types and he was a composer. And so
how did Brian know Peter Schickele? He went to Lehman College and then Cornell. Did he go to Juilliard as well?
He went to Juilliard prep because at that time art and music had a program that and I don't know exactly when. I know they crossed because you get such funny works as Ephigenia at City University. You get those, works being done in the late 60s, which date after he would have left art and music and been at Lehman, but obviously the Cooney reference probably had something to do with, yeah. So Peter is the person who kept in touch with him throughout.
Well, I will try to reach him because I don't know if you remember that Peter Schickele came to Cornell and performed there, and we had a reception for him in Risley. And I met him there for the first time and told him that I had used his PDQ Bach on the Air analysis of Beethoven's Fifth in my music appreciation class, my Rudiments of Music class. And I'll never forget what he said. He said, "If you're not careful, you can learn something." And then 40 years later, I saw him again in Manhattan and reminded him of that and asked him if he remembered what he said. He said no, and I reminded him, and he appreciated that. So I could try to reach him about Brian, because obviously Brian's sense of humor was very much in line with Peter's, which is magnificent.
Which is very much, and I mean, mostly Brian and he talked about their more serious compositions, because he came a couple of times to the Society for New Music and they did Schickele, not PDQ Bach.
Right.
Although the Christmas carols were a staple at our house for many, many years.
Well, tell us about the Society for New Music. I just got their latest brochure, and I think this is the first time that I can remember actually Brian isn't mentioned in it, but he had been mentioned for years and years because there was a scholarship issued in his name. Is it still there?
There's an award. It's made each year. If you read that brochure closely, you'll notice that there are a couple of the young composers who may have won it in earlier years or that. Yes.
Sure.
And there's also an award at Syracuse University. The thought of getting all those awards together never crossed anybody's mind.
So we've talked a little bit about Varese. Now, the 4 piano pieces were written at the same time, and what fascinated me about them as I was studying them, both the Varese pieces, the Varese piece and the piano pieces, at least the first 2 piano pieces, which I recorded and we're going to be hearing, phrase is often made of 12 notes, and only those 12 notes at a single time. So what was Brian's attraction to 12-tone theory and dodecahedron?
He had an attraction to it. It winds up being morphed into all sorts of things, because there were particular critics in the Syracuse area who didn't realize that some of his Baroque parodies were actually 12-tone rows. The 12-tone row, I think, continued as something he used throughout his life in contrapuntal ways that often some reviewers did not get, because there were a number of things that people would think might have been a parody of a Baroque trio, for instance, that actually was a 12-tone row. And he just took great glee at manipulating things. And I think that that's probably what attracted him to Varese. I mean, there is a connection, because I know he studied Dalla Piccolo when he was at Juilliard. And Dalla Piccolo obviously had a connection to Varese. So I would almost think that that was sort of the connecting thing. I mean, he often said, when people said, well, it doesn't sound like contemporary music, and they said, well, the only thing you're listening to is John Cage, you don't know music.
Chris, you were saying about what 12-tone row, what 12-tone technology meant to technique meant to Brian.
It was one of his toys.
Okay.
When he wanted to, he used it to prove to people who didn't think he was modern enough to show that, yes, it was there, and that it didn't have to sound like they all thought it had to sound.
Yeah, that's like Brian.
And he did that all the time.
Now,
and I mean, it was woven with his use of counterpoint. So if you weren't paying attention to the counterpoint, you might miss it entirely.
I want to talk about my various first experiences with Brian, which involved you, Bill Cowdery. Please unmute yourself. I don't know if you remember, you must remember, in Risley, where I came in September of '72, and we did a Candide together. We also did a musical dessert for Carol Husa, and Brian was involved in that. I played a short elegy, a short piece of Carol's, and Brian played a longer piece, it was a sonata, and you, Bill, and I played his 8 Czech duets. Remember that?
Sure, very well.
And then we played them again in your hometown in Ashtabula years later. Yeah, wonderful experience, and Brian really took on the heavy labor of that longer piece. He was quite amazing. Brian was really something. In January of 1973, the world premiere of my violin concerto took place at Risley College, and Dan is the third violinist to have played that now. Janet Packard was the first. She came down from Boston to play it, and on that program was a piano quintet that Brian had written for his friend Laurie Schulman at that time, and Laurie and Brian and my first wife Karen Campbell. By the way, Karen's 70th birthday would have been on the day that this is going to be broadcast. There's going to be what not podcast, what do we say, Zoom, so the 5 of us were there talking, and in the program note, Daniel, I had said that my piece used the highest natural note written for the violin, and Brian countered by in his program note by saying that his piece used the highest natural note written for woodblock. I remember that was his way of countering that. But we went out to dinner, the 5 of us, after the concert, and I remember we were talking about Berg and Mendelssohn and the concerto and so on, and Brian turned to Karen and said, "You think the Yankees have a chance this year?" I mean, he had a way of being irreverent just naturally. In April of '73, Brian was a teaching assistant to a course that I took as a graduate student and that Karen took as an undergraduate. It was in Russian music and Chopin, taught jointly by William Austin and George Gibeon, both of whom were on my committee. It was a marvelous course, and as my graduate student project, I did a translation of Mussorgsky's Ženitba, the getting married, or the marriage, and did a Reader's Theater presentation of it with George Gibeon and William Austin and Laurel Fay and Jared Amaldev all taking parts. Brian was the only TA that didn't have a part in it. And I think he kind of resented it. And he said, if you do another opera, I'd like to be in it. And guess what? In December of '73, I finished Idiots First. It was a 4-year project of Mark Blitzstein. And I have it right here. In August of '74, we did Idiots First, and the pawnbroker was played by Brian Israel. There he is. You can see him with Paul Gibbons and Bill Castleman. This appeared in the Ithaca Journal. I just found this from August of '74.
Excuse me, which is he in that picture? We can't read the caption online.
Oh, okay. You can see Brian is the pawnbroker over here.
Is he facing us, or is he got his?
He's facing you. Yeah, that's Brian is facing you.
Glasses.
Has his back to you, and Bill Castleman is at the other side. But there's Brian negotiating with Mendel, played by Paul Gibbons, and he's trying to pawn a watch, and he says $8, and Mendel says, I must have 35, and the pawnbroker says, so go see Rothschild. That was Brian's favorite line in the opera.